Now, John, you're a musician, you're a composer, a leader, uh, a teacher, a father, but recently you've added author to your creative arsenal. Uh, the book that you've written is about your mom. It's called For Sue. And why did you decide to write a book?
Well, um, basically, Brett, what happened is I was looking for the kind of teaching position that I'm in now. And what I was hearing from some folks is that to be able to get something like that, you really need to go back and finish your undergrad degree and get a master's. I thought I was pretty close. I was essentially pretty close to having finished my undergrad degree, but I ran out of money at the time, and some of the Pell and TAP grants that I got at the time also ended. I switched majors, and so it was going to take like 9 semesters rather than 8, and at the end of 8 semesters, they're like, well, you're going to owe us like 4 grand next year, and I just didn't have it. There was no way for me to come up with that. So about 3 years ago, I sort of formulated this plan of going back to school. And I was teaching at Purchase at the time. I spoke to Todd Coleman, who was running the program, and he said, "Yeah, let's get you in the master's program here. It'd be great. You could be like a second teacher as you're taking the classes and all that." I said, "Well, great." There was a couple of perks that made it a little less expensive than it would have been, and so we started the process. And one of the classes I had to take to finish my undergrad degree it just happened to work with my teaching schedule, was a writing class, and it was a memoir writing class. And here's all I knew about writing going into that is when I was in high school, my high school English teachers, a couple of them said to me, if you weren't so focused on music, I would suggest a career in writing. And that's about as far as my writing went. I don't think I did anything of any note in college. I did write a book for jazz students that actually, about 10 years ago, that just got published on Colin Music called Foundations for Improvisers, but that's just assembling, I'm proud of, the fact the book got published and all of that, but it's not like being a writer. I sat down in this memoir class and she said, all right, the teacher said, write about an event. And then the next assignment was write about a person. And the third week was write about a place. Now, by that point, stuff was coming out. I couldn't have stopped the book if I tried. I then went to Japan for 3 weeks. We stayed in the same hotel in Tokyo for 3 weeks, and by the time I came back, by then I guess it was like maybe October 18th or 20th or something. All the stories were done. Like 95 or 98% of the content of the book was there. I was writing 10, 12 hours a day. I just couldn't stop. And what the book essentially is about, Brett, is about growing up with a single parent who was a profound alcoholic. I was an only child at that time. My mother had two, and then I actually found out 3 children previous to me. And my childhood consisted of, dealing with a lot of poverty, some homelessness, not knowing where meals were going to come from, not being enrolled in school for long periods of time because I had a non-functional parent. Being 7 years old and walking the streets for 3 weeks because I had nothing to do. There was no electricity in the house. There was nothing. But what I did have was I had a lot of help in my life. I always had great people that took care of me and kind of adopted me and my mother to an extent. And the correlation with music with the book is essentially that my mother was a singer. She was a singer in L.A. She was married to a man named Bob Gordon. She met Bob. I've heard the story told a couple different ways, but she met Bob, I believe, in Indiana at her school, which was a girls' school opposite Notre Dame. She was from Kokomo. He was playing with Stan Kenton. He was one of the great young baritone saxophonists in the country. You probably know some of those Bob Gordon records. He's on Clifford Brown's first record as a leader.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so she met Bob. She fell in love with him. She went to meet him and build a life with him in L.A. That probably would have been about 1949. It's an interesting story. My grandparents didn't know anything about him, but when they heard that he was Jewish, they threatened to disown her. And she said, "Just meet him. Just meet him," because they lived in an incredibly segregated. Kokomo was like, you had the WASPs on one side of the train tracks, and you had a couple of black families and a couple of Jewish families on the other side of the train tracks, and that was it. There was no, you didn't cross those tracks, basically. And they met Bob, and they loved him. And you know, so that was obviously a huge turning point in you know, in their lives in a way too, because it sort of took them out of their cocoon, and then all of a sudden they're meeting these other musicians that Bob is working with. I kind of learned about my background over a period of years. And here we go. Nice. Okay. Are we cool?
That's good. Continue your narrative. So you said you learned about your background. You learned about it from your mom. She began to reveal what was happening.
Yeah, basically she told me one set of things when I was quite young, and then I found out as I grew up that a lot of that wasn't true. But in her case, I also came to have a lot of understanding and empathy for it, because she went through a series of tragedies that pretty much would have taken most people out. Bob died in a car accident when he was 27 in 1955 on his way to a gig with Nat King Cole and Pete Rugolo. She was 26, and my brother was just turned 3. I guess he was just turning 4 around that time. And he said, "I remember that all of a sudden Mom had these pills." And he's a doctor. He was a doctor. And our thought about it was that they were prescribed for her. And that combined with drinking, I think she just basically had a breakdown. And she kind of lost reality. She had the kids taken away. She went to jail because she had written some checks that she didn't have money in the bank to cover those checks, and she continued to write checks. She came out of jail. She got her life together. She fought to try to get her kids back. She met a man. They got married. They built a life together. Steve, my older brother, said things were really good again with Mom. She was singing in Indianapolis, where we were living at the time. I was still in and out of foster homes and orphanages, as was his sister Stacy. Yeah, I mean, I may be getting too in the weeds with it, but the bottom line is, you know, she had then that husband died tragically, and then her daughter was diagnosed with leukemia.
Wow.
And this was all happening as she got pregnant, was giving birth to a child with her second husband. And he died quite tragically. He was, I mean, that's a whole thing too. So, I mean, and her father also died. So basically, between the age of 26 and, oh God, I guess 34, she lost 2 husbands, a daughter, had been to jail, had no way of making money. I mean, it was pretty much a disaster.
How did she turn it around, or did she turn it around?
She tried, because she had, I think in part because she had a bad legal history in Indianapolis. She basically couldn't get a job. And so somebody offered her a job in New York. So that was what she told me. She came to New York. She met somebody. They were supposed to get married. They didn't get married. And along I came. So I was told that this great jazz saxophone player, Bob, was my father, because I think that was the story that she was comfortable with. And I saw there were bad signs when I was very young. Even I recognized them. But they got really bad around the time I turned 7. And we were evicted from one place we were living, and we moved into another place, in which we'd eventually get evicted from there. And she just pretty much became non-functional at that point. And so the way I put it in the book is I spent the next 20 years of my life trying to save her, getting her in and out of hospitals, detoxes, mental wards, dealing with grand mal seizures. I know the singer Amy Winehouse, when she passed, one of the thoughts put out was that she had died trying to maybe self-detox and was dealing with a seizure. And that was something that happened to Sue quite a bit. She had grand mal seizures. And so, yeah, that was my life. I was the caretaker of this woman who I knew loved me and who I loved, and I didn't know how to give up on. You don't know. Many people said to me, well, why did you stay? Well, I had a couple of opportunities. When I was 8, at one point, I got really sick, and they thought I had appendicitis, and when I was in the hospital, like a social worker asked me, well, how are things at home? And it came out what was happening. But I realized if Sue had lost me with everything else she'd lost in her life, she wouldn't have made it. And I couldn't have lived with that. So I stayed. And then later, around the time I was 11, we were homeless for a while. We lived with some people we didn't know in the Stapleton Projects. And then she got a bed at South Beach Psychiatric Center, and she was there for about 6.5 months. And I lived with Loretta, who was sort of the lady that, took care of us and got us every apartment we ever had. She'd get the apartment, she'd paint it, fix it up, And when she came out, she was in a good place. She had a period of about a year there of sobriety. And part of that, she said, well, I think you should have somebody that you speak to about this. So I had a social worker. And he said, look, if you want to go in the system, we'll put you in the system. And I said, and by the system he meant, well, going into the system of orphanages and foster homes. And I said, well, the woman's just gotten sober. I think that would be the worst thing for her. And then how do I know where I'm going to live? I've got this infrastructure of friends and people that I love and that take care of me and look out for me. And I was just starting to play the saxophone, which was really my lifeline. Now, about the time that I started to play saxophone, I learned that, in fact, and the reason I always wanted to play was because I thought my father was a jazz saxophonist. I found out that, in fact, that wasn't the case. So it's a little complicated, and there's a lot there's a lot of individual stories of, great things that I learned from her. I mean, sometimes it's a little hard when you talk about something like this and it sounds like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. How did you get through it? Well, I had so many good people in my life, number one. And number two, this was actually a good person. Sue was, and I had the great trumpet player Joe Magnarelli, right?
Yes.
Joe read the book, and he said to me, I saw him on the street afterwards, and he said, man, at the end, I loved Sue. And I said, man, that's so great, because that's really what I wanted people to see. Going through what she went through, most people would need a lot of help, to get through, what she went through. One of the people I talked to that really gave me a lot of insight about her, by the way, was, did you know Jack Montrose?
No, J.R. Montrose?
Not J.R., but Jack Montrose.
No, I don't know Jack. Who's Jack?
Well, Jack was Bob's best friend. Jack was the arranger on the Clifford Brown record. Clifford Brown and his West Coast Sidemen, that was Bob and Zoot, Shelly Manne, and a lot of the Pacific jazz guys. But and he told me a lot of stories about the two of them. Another guy, though, that I'm sure you would know would be Johnny Mandel. Johnny Mandel had a lot of stories about Bob, and he said, man, there were two guys that I lost during my life when I was young that I've never gotten over it. One was an alto player named Joe Maney. That is not a big name, and Phil told me about him. He said, oh man, Joe was one of the baddest cats I ever heard. Dizzy loved him. He was friends with Bird. Just had an accident.
Friends with Lenny Bruce too.
Yeah, and he said the other guy was Bob. He said, I never got over it to this day. He said he was so great. He was going to do such great things. And I think a little bit Sue's life, and maybe to some extent my own life, was a little bit haunted by that. She really never got over losing him. And then I sort of embraced, well, this was my father, and I need to sort of pick up this mantle. And by the time I realized he was not my biological father, I said, well, music is all I have. And so, at any rate, that gives you some idea about the book. But as I said, I did learn a lot of good things from Sue. And the people that knew her loved her. I mean, Loretta loved her. My friends, the family, the Shandersons, they had great stories about Sue. Oh, she had card tricks. She did this. She was funny. Like, you know, when we were real little, stuff that you don't see about your own mother or father, but that, you know, my friends saw. And it was great that they had perspective like that.